The cuff was already closed on my left wrist when my mother opened her folder. We were standing on the porch of the house I had bought 11 days earlier. My porch. The paint on the railing was so new it still smelled like the store. There was a wind chime I had hung that morning, and it was the only thing making a sound, because nobody on that porch was saying anything to me that I wanted to hear. My brother Tom stood beside the officer with his arms crossed, and he had the face he used to make when we were kids, and he had gotten me in trouble for something he did. Satisfied, like he was watching a plan work. The officer was young and uncomfortable. "I'm not arresting you," he'd told me a minute earlier, and he meant it to be reassuring. "But your brother's filed an active theft report tied to this purchase, so I have to detain you while I verify it." Then he'd clicked one cuff onto my wrist and left the other hanging open, and he kept looking between me and Tom like he was waiting for somebody to give him a reason to stop. "She stole family money to pretend she belongs somewhere," Tom said. He said it to the officer, but he was looking at me. $89,000, that's family money. "And she used it to buy this." He waved his hand at my front door so she could play house. My father was standing on the bottom step. "Paul." He did not look at me. He looked at the porch boards like they were interesting, and he said nothing, and I want you to understand that the metal on my wrist hurt less than that. And my mother, Beth, lifted a manila folder like she was raising evidence in a courtroom she had watched on television. "It's all in here," she told the officer. Her voice was steady and almost proud. "Every account. We kept records. You'll see exactly where that money came from." She believed it. That is the part I need you to sit with. My mother stood on my porch with one of my hands already in a handcuff, and she believed that folder was going to be the thing that finished me. I did not say anything. I had spent 32 years learning that the worst thing I could do in front of my family was react, because a reaction was a thing they could use. So I stood very still with the cuff cold on my wrist, and I watched my mother open the folder she had brought to prove I was a thief. There were 4 words I said when that metal came off my wrist. 4 words my mother is still living inside, the way you live inside a house you can never sell. But the cuff was still on. We were not there yet. We were only at the beginning of the worst afternoon of my mother's life. I need you to understand why I had a folder of my own. Why a 32-year-old woman keeps the kind of records that would later save her, sitting in a drawer for 7 years waiting for a day she hoped would never come. The account started on a Christmas. I was 25. We were at my parents' house, and Tom had just gotten back from somewhere. He was always just back from somewhere, some opportunity that needed funding. After dinner, he leaned over to me at the table and asked if I could float him $2,000 until February. He said it quiet, the way you ask for something you already know you'll get. I gave it to him. I always gave it to him. February came and went, and so did the next February, and one night I made the mistake of mentioning it to my mother, not to make trouble, just to say it out loud to someone. My mother set down her coffee and looked at me like I'd tracked mud across her floor. "Nina, that's family money," she said. "It moves around. You don't keep a ledger on your own brother." That was the first time I heard it. Family money. 2 words that meant when I had it, it belonged to everyone, and when Tom had it, it belonged to him. I went home that night and I opened a separate account at a bank none of them used, a payroll account, and I had my paycheck split so a piece of it went somewhere they could not see and could not name. I did not do it because I was planning anything. I did it because I had just learned that in my family, my money was a community garden and my brother's money was a locked room, and I wanted one locked room of my own. A woman at work asked me about it once, years later. My friend Rachel, who sat 2 desks down in the billing office, she saw me logging a transfer into a little spiral notebook on my lunch break, and she asked why I kept track of my own savings like I was auditing a stranger. "Because one day," I told her, "they're going to say I took something, and I want to be the only person in the room holding the proof." Rachel thought I was being dramatic. I watched her decide not to say so. That was 4 years before the cuff. Here is the practical truth of what was happening on that porch. The thing I could lose if my mother's folder said what she thought it said. If they convinced one tired officer that my down payment was stolen family money, I could lose the house, not just the embarrassment of it. The actual house, frozen in a claim, tied up, unsellable, unlivable, the 7 years of myself I had poured into the walls turned into evidence against me. 7 years. That is what was in that account. Not family money. Time. My time, taken out of every paycheck while my brother borrowed and forgot, and my mother called my carefulness selfishness. So no, I did not keep a ledger on my own brother. I kept one on the day I knew was coming. The folder I kept was not dramatic. That's what people get wrong about proof. They think it looks like a movie. It looks like a tired woman at a kitchen table on a Sunday, 3-hole punching pay stubs. Every 2 weeks, for 7 years, I printed the deposit confirmation and I put it in a folder. Every time I moved money into the savings account, I logged the date and the amount in the spiral notebook. When the balance crossed $40,000, I remember I sat there for a minute because $40,000 was more money than my family had ever believed I was capable of holding on to. She could never keep a dollar in her pocket, my mother used to say about me, to other people. While I sat there, not like Tom. Tom understands money. Tom understood other people's money. There is a difference, and it took me most of my life to learn it. There was a night in the 4th year that I want to tell you about, because it is the night I almost became the woman they needed me to be. Tom called me at 11 o'clock. His voice was doing the thing it did, the warm thing, the little brother thing. He needed $8,000. A deal was closing. He'd have it back in 6 weeks. He swore on it. I had it. That was the terrible part. I had it sitting right there in the locked room, and every cell in my body that had been raised in that house was telling me that a good daughter, a real part of the family, would say yes. I sat on my couch with the phone against my ear, and I opened the spiral notebook to a clean page. And instead of saying yes, I wrote down the date and Tom's name and the amount he was asking for, and one word next to it. The word was no. Then I told him I didn't have it. He hung up without saying goodbye, and the next week my mother called to tell me I had hurt my brother's feelings, that family helps family, that she didn't know where she had gone wrong with me. I kept that page. I want you to remember that I kept that page because it mattered later in a way I could not have planned. Then came the closing week on the house. The lender needed to verify where my down payment came from. $89,000 is enough money that a bank wants a paper trail, and I had one because of course I had one. My loan officer asked me for a source of funds letter, a single page on the bank's letterhead that traced the $89,000 back through 7 years of my payroll deposits and proved every dollar of it was mine, earned, saved, untouched by anyone else. I requested 2 stamped copies. The loan officer asked why I needed 2. Because I always have to prove every dollar, I told her, and one of these is for a day that hasn't happened yet. I put 1 copy in the house file. The other I put in the folder with the pay stubs, the one I'd been building for 7 years, and I slid it into the drawer. I did not know that 11 days later my mother would walk onto my porch holding a folder of her own, and I did not know yet, I could not have known, that some part of what she was carrying had come from me. But we'll get there. First the officer had to ask his question. Back to the porch. Back to the cuff. The officer cleared his throat. He was, I think, about my brother's age, and he had the look of a man who had been called to a domestic dispute expecting a screaming match, and had instead found a quiet woman in work clothes standing in front of a house with a wind chime. "Ma'am," he said to me, "your brother is alleging that the funds you used to purchase this property were taken from a shared family account without authorization. That's a serious allegation." He paused. "Can you account for where the down payment came from?" And here is the thing I want you to understand about that moment. I could have answered him. The second stamped copy of my source of funds letter was in a drawer 15 feet behind my own front door. I could have said, "Let me go inside and get it." I could have ended it right there. But the cuff was on my wrist, and I knew, the way you know things in your own family, that if I went inside and came back with my own paper, Tom would say I'd printed it that morning, faked it, that I'd had time to cook something up. My word against his. My paper against his story. That is how it had always gone. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I stood there with metal on my wrist and I said, "Why don't you ask my mother? She brought a folder. She says it has all the records in it." I watched Tom's face do something small and uncertain. But my mother was thrilled. This was her moment. She'd been collecting paper on me, building a case, for I don't know how long, and now an officer of the law was going to look at it and see what she had always seen. "Yes," she said. "Thank you. Officer, it's all documented. Tom asked me to pull everything together." She stepped up onto the porch, my porch, and she opened the manila folder and she started turning pages, and she was narrating as she went, the way you do when you're certain. Here are the family account statements. Here's where the transfers. She stopped narrating. I watched my mother's eyes stop moving across the page and start moving down it, slowly, the way you read something a second time, because the first time didn't make sense. The officer said, "Ma'am?" She did not answer him. Her thumb was on a page near the back of the folder, a page she clearly had not read before she put it in there, a page somebody had handed her in a stack and told her was proof. And I knew, before she said a single word, exactly which page she was looking at. Because I knew what proof looks like. I had been building it for 7 years. My brother, when he wanted to build his case, had asked our parents to gather everything that touched the family's money. Bank records, old statements, anything with my name on it. And somewhere in that gathering, somebody had pulled my closing file. The house closing had run through the family, not the money. The money was never theirs, but the announcement of it. I had been foolish enough, 11 days before the proudest day of my life, to send my parents a copy of my closing packet, because some small starving part of me still wanted them to be proud. To see that I'd done it. That packet included the lender's source of funds letter. The single-page, on-bank letterhead that traced the $89,000 back through 7 years of my payroll deposits and stated, in language an officer could read in 10 seconds, that the down payment originated solely and entirely from my own earned income. My mother had put that page in her folder. She had carried my proof onto my porch in the same hand she was using to have me arrested. "This says," she started and stopped. The officer held out his hand, not unkindly. "May I see that?" She gave it to him because she did not know what else to do with it. He read it. I watched him read it twice, the same way she had. Then he looked up and his whole body had changed, the way a room changes when the light hits it differently. "This is a source of funds verification from the lender," he said slowly. "It states the down payment came entirely from this woman's payroll account, over a period of years." He turned to Tom. "Sir, this document directly contradicts your report." Then he reached over and he took the cuff off my wrist. I want to tell you what I felt, but it was too many things at once. The metal came off and my wrist was cold where it had been and my whole arm was shaking and I had to put my hand flat against my own front door to keep it still. And there was 1 second where I thought I was going to cry in front of all of them, which was the one thing I had promised myself I would not do. I did not cry. I pressed my hand against my door until the shaking stopped, then I straightened up. And I said the 4 words. I looked at my mother, who was standing on my porch holding an empty folder, and I said, "This is my house." That was all. Not a taunt, not a speech. 4 words, quiet. And I watched them land on my mother like cold water because she understood, in that second she finally understood, that she had just helped put handcuffs on her daughter in front of a house that daughter had paid for, alone, dollar by dollar, for 7 years, while the family called her selfish for keeping a locked room. The officer turned fully toward Tom and asked him to explain why he had filed a report claiming theft of funds that the lender's own letter said were never his. Tom did not have an answer. My father still had not looked at me, and my mother sat down, slowly, on the top step of my porch with the open folder in her lap, and she stayed there. I thought it was over. That's the mistake I made. I stood on my porch and watched the officer write down a different set of notes than the ones he'd arrived to write, and I thought my family had been humiliated thoroughly enough that they would do the thing humiliated people are supposed to do, which is go home and be quiet. I did not understand yet that my family did not know how to lose a thing they had decided was theirs. The officer left. He told me the false report matter would be referred, that filing a police report you know to be false is its own problem, and that it was now Tom's problem, not mine. Tom left without looking at me. My father walked to the car. My mother stood up off my step eventually, set the empty folder on my porch railing like she was leaving it for me, and followed him. For about 9 days, there was silence. I let myself believe in it. Then I got a letter, not from my mother, from a small claims and civil filing office, informing me that a claim had been filed against me by my parents, Beth and Paul, seeking the recovery of family funds in the amount of $89,000 improperly diverted by the respondent. They had refiled it. The exact same lie that had just blown up in my mother's hand on my own porch. Except now, it was on a court form, with my parents' names on the line, asking a public forum to take my house money and give it to the family. I called Rachel from the parking lot at work. I was shaking again, the way I'd shaken when the cuff came off, except this time it was a different kind. "They're doing it again," I told her. "They filed. After all that, they filed." Rachel was quiet for a second. Then she said the thing I needed to hear. "Nina, they just put the lie on paper, in front of a judge, with their own names on it." I had been so braced for the shame of being dragged into a public room that I had not yet understood what Rachel understood in 2 seconds. On the porch, it had been my paper against Tom's word. In a civil forum, it would be their filing, their sworn, signed, public filing against a source of funds letter the lender would confirm with one phone call. They had reached for the same weapon a second time, and they did not understand that it had never been pointed at me. If you've ever watched someone you love refuse to stop digging, refuse to take the exit, choose the hole over the apology, stay with me, because the hearing is where I finally understood my family completely. They didn't file because they thought they'd win. They filed because admitting I'd earned that money meant admitting they'd been wrong about me for 32 years. And that was the one thing my mother could not afford. The hearing was in a small room. I want to be honest about the scale of it because the blueprint of my imagination had built something enormous. And it was not enormous. It was a low-ceilinged room with fluorescent lights and rows of folding chairs, and the only people in it were the people who had cases, and the people those people brought. My parents brought Tom, and they brought 2 of my aunts and an old family friend, the neighbor who'd known us since I was small, people they'd told their version to, people who had come to watch the selfish daughter finally get what was coming. I brought Rachel, and 1 folder. When my parents' claim was called, my father did the talking, because that is what my father does when there is an audience. He goes quiet at home and he performs in public. He stood up and he explained that the $89,000 was family money accumulated over years, that I had access to the family's accounts and had diverted funds to buy a house and exclude my brother. The person hearing the matter asked him for documentation of the family account the funds were supposedly taken from. My father did not have it. Of course he did not have it. You cannot document a theft from an account that the money never passed through. And then my mother could not help herself. She stood up beside my father, and she said the thing she had been saying my whole life, the thing she truly believed, and she said it in a public room with her own name on a court filing. "She stole family money to pretend she belongs somewhere," my mother said. "She always has to have proof of everything. Proof, like she's better than us, like she didn't come from us." The room was quiet. Then I was asked if I had anything to present. I stood up. My hands were not shaking now. I opened my folder and I laid it out 1 piece at a time, the way I had built it, 2 weeks at a time, for 7 years. The source of funds letter from the lender. The payroll account that no one in my family had access to or had ever seen. 7 years of deposit confirmations every 2 weeks in my name from my employer into an account my family could not touch. And then I said, the only thing I added to the paper. My mother says I always have to have proof. She's right. I always have to have proof because my whole life, whenever I had something, my family decided it was theirs. She says I stole family money to pretend I belong somewhere. I looked at her. I didn't pretend. I bought a house. With my money. And the only thing I ever took from this family? My voice caught once, and I stopped, and I made myself finish it clean. The only thing I ever took was the right to make me prove I belonged. My mother's face did the thing it had done on the porch. The slow red. The understanding arriving too late. Because here is what their own filing had done. By putting it on a court form, my parents had forced the question into a place that did not care how anyone felt. The forum looked at a sworn claim of theft from a family account, and then it looked at a lender's letter and 7 years of payroll deposits proving the money had never been in any account but mine, and it did the only thing it could do. It didn't just dismiss their claim. The person hearing it looked at my father and asked him, plainly, whether he was aware that he had now made this same allegation twice, once to police and once in a sworn filing, against documentation that contradicted it completely. My father had no answer. My brother was looking at the floor, And the neighbor who had known me since I was small, the one who'd come to watch me lose, was looking at my parents now with an expression I had never seen anyone aim at them before. The cruelty had finally found the one room where it could not survive being said out loud. The claim was dismissed. That part took about as long as it takes to read a single page, which is the right amount of time, because a single page was all it had ever come down to. The false report referral that started on my porch did not go away just because my parents had tried to bury it under a civil claim. It was Tom's now. I am not going to pretend I know every consequence that landed on my brother, because I was not there for them and I did not chase them. But I will tell you that filing a false police report is not a thing the world simply forgets, and Tom spent the following months learning that lesson in rooms I was not invited to and did not want to be. My father called me 4 days after the hearing. It was the first time he had spoken directly to me since before the porch. His voice had the careful, reasonable tone men in my family use when they want a woman to make the unpleasant thing go away. He said it had gotten out of hand. He said your mother is very upset, as if her being upset was an event that had happened to her, like weather. He said we're family, and surely we can move past this, and let's not let one misunderstanding define everything. A misunderstanding. He called a cuff on my wrist and 2 filings and my mother's voice in a public room a misunderstanding. I had spent 32 years saying yes to that voice, smoothing it over, being the one who let it go so that everyone could have dinner. And I want to tell you that I had some perfect speech ready, but I didn't. I just said, "No, Dad." And then I said the thing that was true. You stood on the bottom step and you watched a police officer put a handcuff on me and you looked at the floor. I'm not moving past that. I'm just not going to bring it up anymore. He didn't understand the difference. I'm not sure he ever will. But there is a difference between forgiving someone and agreeing to pretend it didn't happen, and I had finally found the edge of it. He told me my mother would never get over it. And the strange thing, the thing I didn't expect, is that I believed him, and it didn't give me anything, no satisfaction, just a quiet that I had been waiting my whole life to feel. It's been a while now. The porch has plants on it. I bought a row of them and put them along the railing, the same railing my mother set her empty folder on, and they've grown in over the season so you can't really see where she left it anymore. My family did not fall apart in any dramatic way. There was no big scene, no reconciliation, no second confrontation where everyone wept and saw the truth. My parents and I simply stopped. The phone calls thinned out and then they ended. Tom and I do not speak. My aunts chose a side, and it was not the side that frightened them. They chose my parents, because my parents are the ones who tell the family story, and I had become an inconvenient edit to it. I used to think that would gut me. The going quiet. For most of my life, the thing I feared more than anything was exactly this, being the one the family stopped calling. It turns out the thing I was afraid of was already happening every single day in slow motion every time they decided my money was theirs and my carefulness was an insult. The silence after the hearing wasn't them cutting me off. It was just me finally stopping the part of me that kept dialing. I don't keep the spiral notebook anymore. I don't need to log every dollar against a day that's coming, because the day came and I was the only person in the room holding the proof, exactly like I told Rachel I would be, 4 years before any of it happened. Rachel still sits 2 desks down. She's the one I called from the hearing parking lot. She's the one I called when I got the house keys, and the one I called when the claim was dismissed. Somewhere along the way, the person you call became more honest than the person you were raised to call, and I stopped apologizing for the swap. Here's the thing I came to understand. Standing on a porch that was mine, with a cuff that wasn't on my wrist anymore. They never wanted the $89,000. They could have had money from me any day of my life, and most days they did. What they could not stand was that I had built one room they couldn't walk into. The only thing I ever stole from that family was the right to make me prove I belonged. If you've ever been the careful one, the one they call selfish for keeping a locked door, the one who learned to save the receipts, I think you already know how this story feels from the inside. I tell these stories because somebody should say out loud that keeping the proof is not paranoia. Sometimes it's just knowing your own family. If this one reached you, stay a while. There's another story waiting about a different family and a different door that should have been locked sooner. Subscribe and I'll keep telling them. Somebody in your life should hear the version where she walks away with the receipts on the table. I'll see you on the next one.